Today's presenter is Joe Gleinser. Joe is the co-founder and chief product officer of Trustgrid. Today, he's going to be talking about lowering the cost of connectivity. And Joe, I'll pick it up at the end, but I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Lance. And welcome to everyone. As Lance said, my name is Joe Gleinser, and today we're talking about cost of connectivity, especially around the ROI of cloud applications. I think given our current situation, once you're healthy, the next concern on your mind during the business day is going to be cost management today. So a lot of our customers have been asking about this. It's one of the reasons that many of our customers engage with us early on. They're looking at ways to exit other systems for which the costs have become unmanageable, either in dollars, the easy way to count, or in burden and hassle, a bit of the harder way to count. So looking forward to getting some questions at the end here. We will start without further ado. We'll skip through me. So really what is the cause of this situation, right? What situation has arisen in which connectivity has a cost to it in any way, shape, or form? It's centralized applications that must connect to remote data is where Trustgrid finds this cost problem, this management problem, this deployment problem. And it really speaks to the nature of data itself. The data that gets created not in the cloud environment for the most part, but in offices, in factories, in warehouses, in cars, right? Where the real work is getting done is where the data is being generated. I think for most folks on this call today, and for most Trustgrid customers, the data we're talking about really is banking data, right? And core banking data specifically, that is getting created at the interaction in the branch offices, in the headquarters, in the data centers, as the payments and transactions are being processed. But these applications that need access to that data really are something that is fairly new to the industry, maybe the last decade or a little bit longer. And this is true of banking as well as healthcare and IoT and manufacturing. A lot of those places are in the same situation here, where the data is at the edge, but they want to leverage these applications that are centralized. And I was careful to use the word centralized and not cloud on this slide, because for many Trustgrid customers, this problem originated before the cloud existed. They solved it using some networking technologies or APIs, etc. And now it is just exacerbated with the introduction of cloud technology. So it's really this. It's in the banking space. It's my digital banking, mobile banking, account opening applications that are, so very important in this current situation we find ourselves in, that are either in cloud environments like Amazon, or they're hosted by the provider in their own data centers, but the data still lives at the edge. That's true in healthcare for the EMR, EHR providers. You might log into a website hosted across the country to access your patient data, but that's still uploading MRI images or X-rays or lab results, that the data that just can't be created in the cloud. You can't get an MRI in the cloud or a blood test in the cloud today, or COVID test, very relevant. So when we look at how this problem has been solved before, how have applications overcome the fact that this data exists almost exclusively at the edge, especially for the Trustgrid customers, it is exclusively at the edge. And there's 5 main ways that we've seen this done over the last 20 years. The first, and I think the one that's the original method, is on-premise software deployments. When you were providing software to your customers that must integrate with their systems, you were going to ship them a license, you were going to help them install it on their hardware, maybe you sent an appliance out there, but the software had to be at the data location, had to be in your customers' data centers, at your customers' offices. And that produced a lot of problems. It's very difficult to support that. You have a number of different versions of software distributed all over the place. Technical support really includes supporting that customer environment as well. Is it their mistake or yours, their problem or yours? And for a lot of reasons, people didn't like this idea, and mostly around cost, right? And wanted to centralize these applications into data centers originally and now into cloud. So on-premise software deployment is one of the original methods, but definitely diminishing in importance over time. Sort of out of that, the second method that we see out in the wild is a software agent, which has some of the similar concepts as the on-prem software deployment. I'm going to put a piece of software in my customer's environment, not all of the software, but some small piece of it that can gather the customer data for me and normally batch transaction this data and upload it into my centralized application. That's real common in like payment rewards systems where the data really isn't real time. You just need to get the data from time to time. But then for companies that grow nationally and internationally, you have all the same problems in the on-premise software deployment. You have the time to get it installed. You have the support hassles. You have the many different versions. It isn't that big of an improvement over the original method. And in fact, in some ways, it's even worse with the lack of real-time data integration. So definitely still see this out there. It's very common. It can work fine for certain types of software providers, but not for many of them. The next big method, and really the best method of all of these, is an API integration that supports real time, it supports high security, it supports logging and compliance. But the reality is that most data sets that you need to integrate into your application aren't available via API. Those that are, we choose this method, it works great. Every API is a little bit different in how you integrate to. So there's certainly some challenges in this method as well, but not the same as with the on-premise software deployments. It's fairly easy to manage. Services like API gateways exist to help automate some of this stuff. But by far the best method. It's just in reality a small percentage of the data that you want to access is going to be exposed by API in the next decade or so. The method that most Trustgrid customers use before they meet us is a networking solution. They specialize in connecting to these on-premise data sets with a VPN or an MPLS connection, and then some sort of data manipulation tool in the banking space that's called an adapter or an interface. This is pervasive. It's how all the large corporate banking software companies, the FIS, the Fiservs, the First Datas have done. All the big payment processors do it this way. All the large healthcare companies like Athena Health, they really have focused on this method specifically as being both real time. They can get the data, access to data they want. The security is appropriate for the industry. It can comply with standards like FFIEC or HIPAA. And it produces a very good solution. The number one challenge with this one is cost. That's what we're talking about today, especially. And then finally, the other solution that we do see more and more these days in the industries we're talking about are data aggregators, folks that have solved some mix of these problems and present to you the data you're looking for. This is typically reserved for those companies that are doing read-only access to data. Right? They only want to see data. They're not trying to manipulate it. Doesn't work for payments. Doesn't work for a number of other functionalities. But it can give you a base level of data to some of the data sets that you want. And it typically is combined with the API access to really solve this challenge for those businesses that can have that limited access to data. So all of these can be good in their own right. They all have their detractors, and the costs vary widely. I think really what we're looking at in today's world is going to be the right for. Not many folks are excited about deploying their solution on premise today. And then of those, really what you're talking about are choosing between, if the API is available, you're going that way. If it's not, you're making a decision between the other three choices here: the software agents, the networking, and the data aggregators. So we'll keep all those in mind as we move forward. We do want to talk about the cloud just a little bit because it does change the IT infrastructure equation, right? I've got to not only choose the method here that works best for me, which one of these solutions, but it probably has to work in the cloud. Many Trustgrid customers look at us not only as a replacement for the existing solution, but a method for, as they mature their software offerings into the cloud or those that are already there, to connect the cloud in the same way they've connected their data centers or their on-premise software in the past. And, obviously, cloud is pretty well known in terms of the benefits it's going to provide. You're going to build applications faster, new features less expensively. The operations and compliance aspects are handled by somebody else. They make it work for the most part. And then the flexibility and scalability, I can handle much more traffic. We certainly have seen that with our digital banking customers in the last couple of weeks as the stimulus checks have hit. Every online banking system has been stretched to the max. Those that find themselves in public cloud environments that can just crank the knob up and handle more traffic and more users have had a much less of a problem than those in traditional data centers where the infrastructure they have is fairly fixed. So what does this look like from an application provider's perspective? We're going to start talking about this multi-tenant application. Multi-tenant typically meaning I've got all of my customers accessing one application in a data center or a cloud. This is not a universal term. Some of our customers do have single tenant applications. Some are service bureaus that might host an application for some segment of their customer base. So it's a mixed bag, what we're starting with up top, but generally speaking, the goal we all have is a multi-tenant application, one single code base that's servicing all of our customers, very efficient. And then we have our customers down, obviously at the bottom, typically behind their own firewalls with their own IT security policies, with their own IT skill sets, with their own preferences and configurations. And we need to find a method to connect to that for the integration of that data on-premise, that MRI or that X-ray or that core banking data. And here what we're showing is the most common method that we see is a VPN or MPLS connection. The VPN obviously can compete very well with MPLS for security. It's typically using the customer's internet connectivity, so there isn't a dedicated circuit required like an MPLS, and that makes it far less expensive of the two. But ultimately, both these well-proven solutions installed tens or hundreds of thousands of times nationally, solving just this problem for the software providers that ultimately Trustgrid exists to help. So the challenges with these sort of solutions, though, and this is fairly common if we go back to that slide of the different ways to solve this problem altogether, but especially with VPN and MPLS, it's long deployment times. Trustgrid customers typically talk about several weeks to several months to turn on a new customer to get the initial connectivity established. That's obviously painful. Nobody wants to sign up and wait that long if they can possibly avoid it. The configurations to get it set up is difficult. Some customers rely on their customers to supply equipment, and they're trying to connect two different brands of firewalls or routers for the VPN. Or they're waiting on an AT&T or a CenturyLink to deploy and configure some equipment. And in either extent, it is a hard task, and the configurations are very complex, leading to a lot of these long deployment times, but a problem in and of itself. Getting the security right, probably one of the top complaints we get besides the lead times is they don't know that the security of the existing solution is what it should be. Most of our assessments and audits just turn up that data. Might have been great when it was installed, but it didn't age well. Most infrastructure doesn't from a security perspective, or it is aging well. They're pouring manpower into it and money into it in terms of tools and service contracts to keep patches and updates deployed. And it's just a massive hassle, massive expense to do it right. I think everybody that we work with has compliance as a chief concern. All of our customers are in high compliance industries, healthcare and banking and so on, that have to make sure that they're willing and able to withstand an audit, and also to keep the burden of that audit low, make the data easy to get, give them the critical information that the auditors need without having to jump through a bunch of hoops to get it. Big problem for most of our customers. Managing and supporting the infrastructure. A curious thing happens within Trustgrid customers, something we didn't necessarily anticipate early on. These are usually SaaS software providers, right? They're offering some subscription service or trying to move that way from an on-premise model. And they have all the challenges, technical and operational, of every SaaS provider, of a Salesforce and of a Microsoft Office 365, for instance, might be familiar with. And they have this second set of challenges that requires them to have either a network operations center or an internet operations center, because of the integration between their application and their customers' environments. There's many more moving pieces that they have to manage and support over what a typical SaaS provider gets. If your only delivery mechanism, your only interface with your customers through a website, you're unlikely to get blamed for a lot of other problems. But once you start installing software or systems in your customer environments, it's a pretty safe bet. You're going to get blamed for a lot of things that aren't your fault. It's going to drive up the cost of support, the volume of support calls, the amount of assistance needed for even simple changes. So this is definitely a big one in the soft cost category. Changing technology, we talked about cloud a bit earlier. That's, things are always changing. If you go with the firewall solutions or VPN or MPLS, you're dealing with equipment that might last 3, 4, 5 years and then has to be replaced to maintain security and compliance, which is the end of its life or end of support for those products. And so you're always in the refresh game, or when a game-changing technology like cloud comes about, you're in a complete rip and replace mode, and that gets obviously very expensive as well and very difficult to keep up with. And then finally, if you're integrating your application to your customers' data, you're going to deal with their IT teams, and it depends on your target market. It depends on who you're working with, but both sides of the coin here can be equally expensive and difficult. Customers with limited IT capabilities might need much more assistance in configuring their environment to be accessed by you than a company with much more IT expertise on hand. But those with larger IT departments typically have very high standards in terms of visibility, access, control, documentation, compliance, security, et cetera, and can drive the costs up of getting installed and configured with them to as high or higher than a group with limited IT capabilities. So this is really a lot of the pain that our customers are talking to us about on a regular basis, and really what Trustgrid is built to solve. So MPLS is one that comes up a lot. It is the method preferred by the billion-dollar corporations out there with giant budgets, because especially 20 years ago when the technology was introduced, 25 years ago, it was a good solution to a number of different problems: privacy, security, reliable performance, access to global systems. And it looked to be a really good solution. It was a great solution for a long time. As the internet has matured, its value really has diminished. And we're really seeing a wholesale shift away from MPLS technology globally. SD-WAN providers are really attacking MPLS in the branch office use case. MPLS was used for nearly every branch office or retail location that you can imagine for the last 20 years. But a lot of stuff has changed with MPLS. A lot of what's called MPLS today is not even MPLS. They've kept that name around, and they're delivering an IPVPN solution or some other similar technology that doesn't quite have what it used to deliver, but it sounds good to call it that. So is it a private connection? Is it a dedicated circuit just for what you're using? If you got it a long time ago or you're in a rural area, that might be true. If you're in an urban area of any sort, it is no more private or dedicated than your VPN connection, right? It's all a logical segmentation, not a physical segmentation. There's not copper in the ground that you're running on. Is it more secure than regular internet? And here, regular internet, in my definition, is going to be HTTPS traffic, right? When you go to your bank's website and you log in there. MPLS works a lot like those systems work, or VPN over the internet. It is more secure than just transmitting files over the unencrypted internet, but that really doesn't exist post Edward Snowden. If you follow those, most of your internet traffic is going to be encrypted to some extent on the network, and it's going to look a lot like the MPLS side does. The MPLS is the best way to ensure network performance. It gives me lower latency, the term that we frequently use here. There's now a lot of different ways to get that network performance, and MPLS is one way to do that. But it could be argued that there are much better ways now to control the performance of the system in an unpredictable internet. If the MPLS circuit is running across many different routers in between your application and your customer, it might not be able to guarantee that network performance in a way that it could 20 years ago. And as anybody who's dealt much with the telecom providers know, that the only punishment, your SLA violations that a telecom will offer you are pennies in the dollar, right? You'll have a violation of their guaranteed performance level, and the refund to you is $9.13, hardly worth doing the paperwork for. And then finally, this global network to connect to any location. MPLS was a great way to do international connectivity for a very long time. And this definitely has been supplanted now with the rise of the managed network providers who have a sort of a cloud approach to it. They are building global networks. They're granting you access to it. You're encrypting your traffic over that. And MPLS really doesn't come into play there at all. In fact, it's usually not supported by many of those vendors who prefer traditional VPN type technology, easier to manage, easier to support. So, beyond some of the challenges we've highlighted already here, there's definitely a second order of complications that come along from many of these solutions. When you choose an option here, it's a long-term solution. Even if you aren't customizing your application to use these systems, so that's VPN, MPLS, typically API would be a heavy customization. You don't want to be changing this technology all the time. You're going to be locked into it, which is just the price you pay for operating in the modern world. And you're going to accept its limitations. And when you go with a solution like VPN or MPLS, your limitations are very, very apparent. It is just a networking technology. It just connects the two sites. And it hasn't changed in 25 or 30 years now. This is essentially the same solution. It's not going to be giving you any more capabilities or functionality tomorrow than what you have today. The scale, VPN, one location, Amazon to your office, or your home to your data center, that's easy and simple. MPLS, really the same thing, one branch office connection, no problem. It's when we start talking about dozens or hundreds or worse yet, thousands of these connections that the technical and operational complexities really just are exponentially more difficult. If you can imagine, managing hundreds or thousands of firewalls that you're used to connect your VPNs to, just the patching alone. How do you patch one firewall at your office? That's pretty easy. Maintenance window, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it all goes well. You're back up and running, no big deal. Now do that 300 times or 400 times, and it becomes like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Right? Once you get done, you just start back and keep going again. And then finally, we're seeing a lot of the customers, those end users, our customers that don't want complex, expensive connections. They don't want the cost of them. They don't want the security vulnerabilities that have historically gone with them. They don't want a bunch of equipment in their data centers that they don't have access to. This is especially true in the MPLS world. We're seeing more and more folks who put up with a $600, $800, $1,000 a month connection for the last 20 years say, my neighbor over here, my friend's in the same business and gets it done with a different solution that costs incredibly less dollars. How come I can't do that? What are the trade-offs there? So I would suspect that this item here, customers don't want the expensive connections, is an opportunity as well. If you are leveraging one of the more expensive solutions, to go back to your customers and be able to offer a lower cost solution that preserves the margin that you probably have in that connection, can be a really solid play in this day and age. So we're getting into the meat of the presentation here and some of the costs that we really have to be aware of. No matter what solution you have, you really have these three categories of costs that we're going to break down for you. The capital expense is that are equipment typically, right? Also subscriptions and so on that go with that, the license fees that go on top of the equipment, all that cash up front cost. That for $1,000 to $2,000 per site is a pretty inexpensive rollout as far as we've seen in the market. It can easily be thousands of dollars more. In your data center, those costs can easily be tens of thousands of dollars if you're going to support more than a dozen or 2 dozen customers. So you get that piece to worry about. The operating expenses are going to dwarf the capital expenses over time. Your service contracts, your MPLS expenses, your circuit costs, right, from your telecom providers, your internal resources that are required to support and maintain these complex solutions. Very, very difficult task here. Certainly, not an easy job that is going to be expensive over the long term. And these costs just keep piling up every month. And then finally, opportunity cost. What features are you walking away from? What problems are you suffering what are you missing out on because you aren't able to accommodate that technically on a solution like on-premise software deployment, right? Rolling out a new feature, if you're set up in that market, it's incredibly difficult. You're relying on your customers to perform the update on the software. Even if you have centralized that, the new feature rollout, the new integration that might not support some of the older systems on premise. You have a one-size-fits-all solution now. You might like to have some of the aspects of the on-premise software deployment still around. So, large cost, these solutions are very expensive. And obviously we're here today to talk about a better way and show some cost comparisons here. So the Trustgrid solution is what we call a data mesh solution. And at its fundamental level, it's going to work a lot like a network connection. It's going to work in a way that most applications are already configured for, or already used to, and don't have to be changed in any way to support. And then there's so much more, right? So we have this layer of connectivity. We're abstracting away a lot of the hassles of managing IP addresses and credentials and firewall rules and security permissions. All that's automated in the system here, so much easier, simpler solution to deploy and maintain. It easily integrates that data no matter where it is, right, across all the different clouds, across all the different sites, and sites that have needs for very high-end, very high reliability, high security solutions. Usually those sites are paying quite a bit more to our customers a month. And then those sites that might not have that budget, sites that might have a lower level of need, that just want some basic level of connectivity to get up and running. Both those we cover. We talk about this data being highly available, discoverable, secure, interoperable is a big deal here, right? We don't want the application to have to change a lot to access all the different applications that it might need to access. And then finally, it's got to lower the cost of deployment, management, and operations to give our customers the ROI that justifies the relationship in the first place. So the three main elements that we talk about here, the application, that's usually a centralized application provided by a SaaS provider of some sort. The intermediary, the middleware, we used to call that one, which still is call that the on-premise software deployment model or the agent model. Some method that we're going to use to access the data. And then the data that's typically in the customer environments and typically at a scale of dozens or hundreds of these installations. Those are the three major parts we take care of. And in the Trustgrid world, it looks kind of like this. On the left-hand side, we have either a mix of a mix of data sources, right? This could be an application database, like a core banking application. It could be an on-premise device like an MRI machine or an X-ray machine. It could be a data lake. It could be some aggregation of data in the public cloud. Really, we don't care what that data is. By leveraging the networking we do, we can access all of it. And then we can present that to applications in what we call a virtual data warehouse. So this is data warehouse, of course. You would replicate that data from the on-premise environments into one big data set, one data warehouse that you can then use to read, to run all your queries against, to access all that data when you want to and have it locally. Well, the real reality that most folks have found about building data warehouses is you really can't do that. The ability to store data one place, one time works for very few use cases. What you really need is the ability to access that data where it resides, because it changes all the time, because from a security perspective, you don't want to copy all that banking data or healthcare data up in the cloud. The data sets are too large. Many cases, our customers are dealing with petabyte-sized data sets that would cost you tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands a month to move into the cloud. Or compliance, GDPR in Europe, California's new privacy regulations definitely come into play here of where the data can legally be stored about consumers and how it has to be accessed. So for a lot of those reasons, this virtual data warehouse concept is going to give you access to the data you need for your application without the need to replicate that data at any point in time, to let it live where it needs to live. And how do we do this, right? What are the major components is this data mesh solution that encompasses the software-defined networking to connect all these solutions together easily. It has an application deployment layer that allows us to help push application components, really, usually in the form of containers, Docker containers, but also just scripts or binary files that help you get the data you want the way you want it into a single, typically API on the third section here. That's used both for the data integration, right? Your single API call can bring in the data no matter what the source database. You're not having to rely on individual per application, per database integration tasks. You have one master API that controls and automates a lot of that for you. And then, of course, a management layer. Once this thing gets large enough to be valuable, you still have some of those challenges we talked about earlier. We've just automated them and then exposed the results of that data via an API. So from a management task, you can tell that your sites are all online. They have been online and functioning correctly for the last 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, whatever. They were patched at the right time. And you can choose to use that data internally or to present it to customers in a customer portal, which is common for Trustgrid customers. We break this down a little bit further to the architectural level. We start at the top here, number one, with our management portal. And this is where a lot of the secret sauce happens for Trustgrid. It's how we deliver the cost savings that we're getting to here in the next couple slides. Because instead of relying on manual human resource requiring tasks, we've written as code in much the same way you can think of that Amazon or Microsoft Azure have built their cloud solutions. What your team might have been doing in a data center for the last several years is now done with a combination of 95% code and 5% manual effort that's rapidly becoming code. The Trustgrid solution works just like that. And our management portal, our centralized infrastructure, is what's going to handle that. The monitoring of the status of connections, alerting when problems happen automatically, configuring it in one place and pushing configurations down to never have a version control problem or the inability to recover from backup if a device failed. We talked about patching, updating a lot so far. And then this API thing we're talking about, the management data that you can grab and access or control the entire infrastructure if you prefer. Where the virtual data warehouse lives, we have gateway nodes. And these nodes are not that much different than our edge nodes, which live on-premise, but they have some special capabilities. They do terminate the connections into some data center or cloud environment. It does expose the APIs here if we're going to access data through an API for an on-prem data set or a disaster recovery and failover. It's orchestrating the cloud side or the data center side of that, the application provider side of that especially. And then the edge nodes, where we get on-premise data access or our customers' cloud environments or our customers' data centers, where we're delivering, whether it's a hardware appliance or virtual appliance or software-based solution, a WireGuard agent, into a customer environment to give us that access there. So deployment. This is really one of the first areas we'll talk about costs in terms of what does it take to get this thing installed and running when compared to the other solutions you have out there. So if you're in a cloud environment like Amazon, it starts with an AMI. So a couple of minutes to get deployed in your Amazon environment. If you're in a data center, still just a couple of minutes usually for a virtual appliance. How do you get the node to the customer? Typically, Trustgrid is involved here in terms of a customer fills out an online form with the appropriate network information. We validate that. We configure the solution, either on hardware or virtual appliances, and deliver it to them. We definitely have turnups that take 1 day. Of course, there can be no shipping involved there. Those are always virtual appliances, but about a week is the amount of time it takes the customer to get the appliance. The customer has to whitelist some traffic on their firewall for the outbound connection. They connect the device or the virtual appliance, and the circuit is up. So this can happen very quickly, very inexpensively. This process with an MPLS or VPN connection would have dozens of little circles along the way, each one representing substantially more cost than the entire process here does. So when we're talking about the benefits of this solution, the connectivity obviously is the most apparent. We get the connectivity we need at the cost we need it done, right, with a variety of price points across the Trustgrid solution. We enhance the security, so we minimize the risk of breach, which certainly has a cost to it, but we decrease the cost of keeping the system secure by automating the patching and updating, by automating certificates, right? We don't have any pre-shared keys or passwords anywhere in the network that have to be changed out once in a while. They're just certificates, and we handle that. The availability, our customers typically have SLAs with their customers, and if they're down, they're losing money because of it. Our guaranteed availability is our stamp on top of that, so that will not happen. And then the ability for you to be agnostic to data centers, to clouds, to whichever environment you want, to give you the ability to price shop on the other side of this equation and find the solution that's right for you. Trustgrid can take you into any one of those cloud environments. So it's the most cost-effective way that we've seen in the market to connect there. Some pretty common experiences here, about a 50% decrease in total cost of ownership for our customers to date. We've deployed more than 1,000 nodes for more than 500 organizations, about 75% reduced deployment time, and our uptime to date, very high, 99.99%. Talked about these cost sides. Another aspect that customers like to see from us is the time to revenue. They want to sign a customer up and they want to start billing them as quickly as possible. The customer wants the solution as quickly as possible, but they're waiting on the circuit to be connected. They're waiting on the integration team to be done. And Trustgrid can help take a lot of that out of the mix as well with those one-day deployments or 1 week for a hardware appliance. So I want to share some real-world data here to kind of compare Trustgrid to some of these other solutions that you can really see what the cost savings looks like. So all of these are based on real-world customers, anonymized to protect the innocent, but we'll give you a good example of what it costs our customers to operate these networks and what it looks like regardless of where you're at on the scale. And we'll look at versus VPN, we'll look at versus MPLS, and then we'll look at the WireGuard solution that Trustgrid offers. That's by far the lowest cost option, the easiest one to get set up, and compares really to an on-site agent of some sort. So this customer here has about 280 devices across 250 customer sites they're connecting to. 30 of those customers use an MPLS connection. We frequently see this hybrid approach. The customers that have higher demands, usually higher subscription fees, are paying for an MPLS connection. And those that they need a lower cost connection, this should be a number higher than 0 here. Typically VPN everywhere else, 220 sites would have VPN here. Hardware cost per site is pretty standard, $1,800. There's going to be some Cisco routers or firewalls, probably a pair of those in case one were to die. And then your SmartNet contracts on your Cisco, so 2 of those, about $600 a year for that. And then for the MPLS circuits, these are all over the place price-wise. If you're paying much more than $700 for some, you either have very, very fast, very large MPLS circuits, or you haven't renegotiated in a while. Bulk buyers north of this get 1,000 connections. You can get this down to about $300, $400 for small circuits, but $700 is a good average we see for our customers. This customer happened to be in Amazon, and they're relying on the Cisco CSR solution, which is the Cisco equivalent to what Trustgrid does, the VPN or MPLS. It works fine for both, can terminate both. And then that was running them $32,000 a year for their 2 regions in Amazon. And then they had the internal cost, and these are just numbers they supply us with. On average, they come out to be about these. These aren't the actual numbers, but when I talk to customers for an environment of this size, this is what they're going to tell me. Their network engineers are about fully loaded $80 an hour that are required to deploy, support, and manage this infrastructure. About 100 hours a month of support if I have 250 sites. That isn't necessarily problems with the solution, but problems, the number one source of problems that we see within our customer environments are their customer environments. If it's banking software that is connecting to a bank, the bank is having a problem. The bank thinks it might be the software provider and is going to call them. And job one is to explain that that's not the case, that we can tell that it's not our fault and that here's how we know it, and give them whatever assistance that we can offer them in helping them solve the problem on their side. So hours there are quite a bit higher than what it would be without that. And then if we do want to patch and maintain all of this stuff a month, this is typically carrying a markup because it's always after hours. It's 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. on a Saturday or a Sunday. It's a tough task to get that done. You can't patch those. Typically, some of the patches go poorly, and you have to ship new devices. The patches don't always work well. And then if we have time on a new customer, how many customers are we rolling out? 8 hours is about what one new location would be a month in this VPN model. And then what is the cost to install the whole solution, right? If you're to go through and have to do all 250 sites again, what is the internal labor cost on that one? Then it breaks down, by year. A 4-year life cycle on this stuff is fairly common in our experience. This is not a cheap way to do it. $3.5 million over 4 years. Maybe you're a little lower, maybe you're a little higher. This is just based on real world data from our customers and what they're paying to operate an environment of this size. This is a fairly large customer, 250 sites, but certainly we see folks that have 1,000 sites, 2,000 sites and up. So the Trustgrid cost, the equivalent cost to replace this solution in its current configuration, so what we call high availability edge nodes, right? We're putting 2 of them out in place of 1, just like with the Cisco solution, so apples to apples. Our hardware is just much cheaper. We use off-the-shelf devices that are made by the same company that makes Palo Altos and Fortinets and those sort of vendors, enterprise-class hardware, but it doesn't have to do everything. It just does this one thing, and it does it very well. It can do more than that with our Edge API and Edge Compute solutions, but at the base level, it doesn't have to. The annual subscription fee for this sort of configuration, the platform and SLA fees, this is what they're paying to get all of these 250, really it's almost 500 of those installed on site per year, right? Per year is what that is. And then their side to run the software to get the portal and access the configuration and everything. And then when they ask us to do the full install, which is fairly common, they want us to take the whole problem off their hands. When they compare it to their VPN solution here, you're getting about a 34% savings over the course of 4 years. And you get a lot more than just a network connection on top of that, right? You're getting out of the security. You're really taking what is a non-strategic task within your organization, and you're moving it to somebody for which it is strategic and allowing your team now to focus on whatever is better for them to focus on. Is it more data center challenges, technical, or can they provide value to customers in some new way? Are you able to cut back on some costs there? All those things are possible. So 35% savings is pretty typical for a comparison against a VPN solution like this. If we look at MPLS, it gets much higher. MPLS, of course, much more expensive per connection. And here we have a similar number of sites, 235 for these guys, many more devices, and 110 MPLS connections, the rest being VPN. And I won't go through all these individual components. I think you've got a pretty good understanding of that. If you look at this MPLS connection, very, very common for us to see $2, $3, $5 million a year spent on an MPLS type solution for these sort of customers. This one coming in at 2.8 the first year when you buy the hardware, and just less than 2 the rest. Very, very common. And the equivalent Trustgrid solution that delivers the same availability, right, the same performance, much better security, lower cost of management, and then the ability to access the higher end features all bundled together here in this solution, and a 56% cost savings over 4 years. So you might imagine folks get pretty excited about that. We like competing against MPLS. VPN, we also have a cost advantage on, but this is the wowzer moment for our customers. And then finally, a lower cost solution, the lowest cost solution that Trustgrid offers, and sort of a comparison against, we see sometimes our customers that are shipping a very inexpensive box to their customer to get connectivity established, perhaps aren't spending a lot of the time required to do the patching and updating, are able to really find a way to get just the minimum viable solution out to the market and get their minimum needs met without a lot of the higher end performance or availability. And so Trustgrid offers this on Wireguard, which is a new type of VPN technology. We didn't build it, we just incorporated it into our solution. Very well known in the IT industry. Almost any device can turn into a Wireguard device. It's bundled with Linux today, but it can run on Windows and everything else. And so when we go this route, there is no cost for the edge node side and no cost for hardware at Trustgrid. No cost for hardware is possible in the other 2 solutions as well. We showed it with hardware, which is the most common. But if you went just virtual appliances, you would have a 0 cost of hardware. and then zero edge node subscription, because you just pay for the cloud side or data center side of this for 100 sites to be turned on. Even with Trustgrid installing this, you can get this cost of connectivity down to, what do we have, about $600 a year per site. So $50 a month, not too shabby. And then looking at that when compared to a single VPN solution, one device, one support contract, et cetera, 70% savings there. Maybe you like a cheaper device, so you don't pay the SmartNet contract. The savings are going to be there 20, 30, 40% as well. So your mileage may vary, but hopefully these examples from real world scenarios are helpful to understand the cost of this. So who are our customers? Just talking just very briefly about a few of these guys, and we'll open up for questions. I want to give some time here. Data.world is the data integration, master data model, data catalog provider that is data agnostic. They work with all industries. They work with all types of companies, profit, nonprofit, higher education. They have a cloud application that needed to connect to these applications. And they chose Trustgrid for that solution, for the security, for the persistent high availability connection, and the automated functionality of it. Aperture is a digital banking provider formerly owned by First Data, with about 435 banks they work with. They were moving to Amazon and needed to find a solution very quickly. We delivered on that for them and connect to all of those banks today from their Amazon environment. So we'll go ahead and take some questions now, if there are any.
Hey, Joe, we've had one question come through so far. That question is, how is Trustgrid installing at their on-premise locations? So we offer a lot of different methods for that, but most commonly it is done with a hardware appliance, $300, $400 hardware appliance that is shipped pre-configured, so that the customer only has to connect the internet and power to it. Just the simplest install possible. Virtual appliances are possible as well that eliminate that hardware cost. Then that WireGuard option as well, which is really just a matter of putting a license key on a system that runs WireGuard. WireGuard's free for anybody, and that connects it to the Trustgrid system. It does take a little more IT talent, but a real quick solution, easy solution. Okay. Another question came in. What clouds does Trustgrid support?
Yeah, so Trustgrid has the four major clouds that we officially support: Amazon, Azure, Google, and Oracle. The majority of our deployments today are going to be in Amazon and Azure. Those seem to be winning the battle for the customers we deal with. And each one of those has some different functionalities that are important to keep in mind. Amazon seems to have the most robust features that we can integrate with today. That definitely is the one we put the most effort into, but Azure is right behind there. That definitely has changed a lot in the last couple of years as Azure really has caught up to Amazon, and we're getting those integrations completed on a regular basis.
Okay. Another question, how does Trustgrid meet the compliance requirements of its end users?
That's a good question, because one of the first questions that end user, when you're installing a new solution, is going to ask is, how does this affect my compliance? How do you patch update? How do you secure? What are your security policies and password rotation policies? And so Trustgrid is a SOC 2 Type 2 compliant organization, which typically is the gold standard there. We fly right through the compliance process. We do have a due diligence package that we share with our customers that can include things like penetration tests, vulnerability scanning, our IT policies, our backup disaster recovery policies. And so we're able to customize that package. Each customer for us is a little bit unique, but to get them in a SOC 2 report is typically the starting point for all of that.
Okay. One more just came in. It says, how does security compare between VPN, MPLS, and Trustgrid?
Yeah. What we're talking about there really is encryption, right? Is the data that is in transit encrypted? And then what are the keys used or certificates used to perform that encryption? And with MPLS and with VPN, typically it's a password that you're using. And what we find is with many folks, it's the same password across all the devices, all of the systems. because it's just hard to manage 300, 500, 700 different passwords that typically fall back to the easiest path. That's a major vulnerability. You get one password, you get them all. With Trustgrid, we use unique keys for all of that. Unlike VPNs, which you're typically talking about an IPsec VPN, 25-year-old encryption technology, still very secure and highly recommended, just not the same as what Trustgrid is doing with the TLS security these days, with mutual authentication of both the server and the client with the key rotations, just the next tier up. And then the next big area is going to be the zero trust access to the network. When you connect via VPN or MPLS, you're essentially just opened two doors and put a big tunnel between them for network access. And you must then go back in and restrict access to specific servers or hosts or systems. And that typically changes over time. And you got to keep up with those rule sets, the access controls. And that usually doesn't happen. That's a hard thing to get right. And with Trustgrid, that zero trust access starts off with no access to anything. You must specifically grant access to certain systems subject to certain policy restrictions. We have a lot more options on what that can be. And then it's really easy to audit and monitor that as well and make sure you're keeping up with changes in the environment.
Okay. I think that was it for questions.